Hey everyone, welcome to our study of Zechariah 10. And I hope you've been enjoying our commentary, our explanations of Zechariah so far. It's been, I know, eye-opening for me even as I've researched some of these chapters to make sure I understood every part of them. Zechariah is a book written by the prophet Zechariah during the time of the what we call the post-exile. This is when the Jewish people, the tribe of Judah and Benjamin, came back from Babylon after being exiled. They were in the land and they had gotten distracted and busy and had paused the building of God's house. And so he called the prophet Zechariah and Haggai to call the people to rebuild his temple, to begin work again, to get the temple off the ground. And this was the beginning of the second temple, not Solomon's temple, but the temple that would eventually become Herod's temple. In these first chapters, we've had a lot of really amazing teachings and things that are valuable for today, because we've seen that many of these are end times prophecy, the prophecies even about our generation, things that you and I may see come to be fulfilled. Especially one that's very pertinent right now was the vision in Zechariah 5 about the female stork angels carrying the basket with wickedness and to the land of Shinar, which is probably the United States, where they were going to build a house for her. That's a very interesting vision. If you haven't seen that one, I definitely recommend going and watch that. But obviously, the entirety of this book is for all of us to study and learn about what God is doing, wants to do, and how He feels about things. So as we jump into chapter 10. To understand chapter 10, we really need to look at chapter 9. Now, we just got finished with two different videos on chapter 9. But remember, as you study the Bible, especially the Old Testament, that there were no chapter dividers originally. Originally, the scroll was just one long scroll written by Zechariah and then copied by other scribes over the years. These chapter dividers were added later. Sometimes that can hurt our study of a chapter, our understanding of a study, because we may we tend to stop our reading at a chapter break, and then the next day we might pick up the next chapter break. That's typically what we do in Bible studies, etc. These chapter breaks are pretty powerful as far as how it manipulates our Bible study, and there's nothing wrong with them, but sometimes it can cause us to miss something. So in this case, in Zechariah 10, that's what it would do if you don't go back and remind yourself of what was in chapter 9. Because chapter 10 starts off with, "Ask the Lord for rain. In the time of the latter rain, the Lord will make flashing clouds. He will give them showers of rain, grass in the field for everyone." So this seems like God is just talking about just pray for rain in the time of the latter rain, and He's using these terms, weather-like terms, and we're not sure necessarily what those are referring to. And a lot of people spiritualize this. There's been entire movements called the latter rain movement, and they were, charismatic Pentecostal movements that are based in part on passages like this. But the term latter rain is not a spiritual term. It doesn't mean it couldn't be, but it's referring to a very specific time in Israel's year, in the agricultural year of Israel. The former rains are basically meaning, you see in the Old Testament it says former rain, it's referring to the rains that come in the fall, after the Feast of Tabernacles in Israel. Around late October, mid-October through November. Those rains are called the early rains or the former rains, and they come every year after what's considered to usually be a dry, hot summer. The early rains are famous for kind of igniting the soil, like reviving the soil, and what had become totally dead and barren has now started to grow a little bit of grass, some life, so that when the latter rains come, it won't wash the soil away. The latter rains come in the springtime in Israel, what we would consider springtime, but for them it's the more towards the end part of the year, which is why they call it the latter rain. Now, in this case, we need to go back and connect it to chapter 9. So in chapter 9, we saw verses and images about Jesus coming back. I'm going to fix this camera real quick. Sorry, I think it's a little bit high. It's bothering me. Sorry. We saw references to Armageddon, to the millennial kingdom, and to life in the millennial kingdom. And towards the end of that, like if we go back to verse 17, describing the millennial kingdom after the battle of Armageddon, it says, "For how great is its goodness and how great is its beauty. Grain shall make the young men thrive, and new wine the young women." So remembering that there were no chapter breaks when this scroll was written down, here's how it would have read originally. "For how great is its goodness, how great its beauty. Grain shall make the young men thrive, and new wine the young women. Ask the Lord for rain in the time of the latter rain. The Lord will make flashing clouds. He will give them showers of rain, grass in the field for everyone." So the latter rain, in the purest understanding of this passage, would seem to be applying to a time of year, a specific time of year. And I'll talk about the possible spiritual meanings in a minute, symbolic meanings, because I understand it can be symbolized. But I think this is actually referring to something literal in the millennial kingdom. And I think it's telling us that there's going to be a time period. We have this idea that the millennial kingdom is going to be just Jesus returns, everybody in the Battle of Armageddon just melts immediately just by seeing them. They just fall over and melt away like in Raiders of the Lost Ark. And it's just, and then 1,000 years of just, and worship, and the world is just fixed. No issues. That doesn't really match, though, how God tends to work, does it? He doesn't do things like that normally. While it would be extremely miraculous for Jesus to return, and he will return miraculously, and there will be a rapture that's miraculous before that happens. But while those things are massive and miraculous, and there will be a total destruction at the Battle of Armageddon, there isn't necessarily a clear biblical teaching saying that the Battle of Armageddon will be begun and ended in like 30 seconds. What if it takes days? And you say, well, but it's Jesus. Jesus wouldn't take that long. I don't know what he's going to do. I just know that when he was here before, he didn't just walk around with a halo on top and everybody just kind of was forced to bow wherever he went. He interacted with us as in the real world as a man, and things happened consistent with the normal processes of things. It didn't mean that there weren't miracles. There absolutely were miracles. The resurrection was a miracle. Resurrection of Lazarus, the healing of the blind. We have the parting of the Red Sea with Moses. I mean, there's going to be miracles. I'm not saying that there's not. I'm just saying that there are messianic passages about the return of the Messiah that seem to indicate a period of time passes before the full conquest, before Jesus' kingdom is fully established to conquest. I see scriptural evidence that says that it's not necessarily going to be immediate, like in just 30 seconds, the way we might have in our imagination. In fact, I should have had this verse looked up. I wasn't really expecting to go down this path in my conversation here, but there is a passage. Well, I'm not going to be able to find it here live quickly. But in the book of Revelation, it talks about the amount of time that the people of God, that Israel, are going to be fleeing from the enemy as being 3.5 years. And then it says, I believe I'm trying to remember where the verse is. Forgive me. But it's like 1,260 days is the amount of time that the woman is going to be fleeing, that Israel is going to be fleeing from the enemy, from persecution. And this is after another 3.5 years, 1,260 days that the two witnesses would bear witness. To Together, that's 7 years. But then there's a curious place. I wish I could find it. I should have had it ready. Where it says, blessed is he who makes it to, I think it's 1,335. That's a difference of 75 days. And many people have asked themselves, why? Why is there this gap? And I think others have calculated maybe more 45 days. But regardless, there seems to be a gap where it's saying, you might need to, there's going to be another period of time that the survivors have to get through before everything is established and in peace. And in Egypt, in Isaiah 19, the description of the Messiah coming into Egypt and conquering doesn't seem to be like an overnight thing. It seems like it takes at least a certain number of days. So I guess my whole point here is, I'm wondering if this reference to the latter rain isn't corresponding with those 75 days difference after the second coming of Christ, because I'm expecting the second coming of Christ to be connected to the Feast of Tabernacles, okay, which would be, because of the theme of the Feast of Tabernacles is Jesus coming to tabernacle with us, is God tabernacling with us, coming to dwell on the earth with us. So mid-late October is probably when the second coming will be. That is not the rapture, not necessarily connected to the rapture, right? So we're not setting dates for the rapture, which is the event we don't know the day or the hour. But I am expecting the Feast of Tabernacles to be connected with his second coming, just as it was connected to his first birth, his incarnation. And if you have a period of time, that period of time of roughly 75 days, say mid-October, well, that would take you to, I guess, end of January, sometime in February. You're getting to the point right about the time of the latter rain. So I'm wondering, and this is pure speculation, so if you think everything I just said so far is bunk, that's fine. You don't have to agree. I'm just giving you my best interpretation of this, how this connects to the millennial kingdom, which was referenced at the end of the previous chapter. I think it may be indicating that the Messiah is coming back, and there's going to be this period of time, and about the time of the latter rain is when everything's going to finally be at peace and settle down. And he's saying, now ask the Lord for rain. Ask the Lord for rain in the time of the latter rain. And the Lord will make flashing clouds, which are like lightning storms and, thunderstorms. He will give them showers of rain. And in fact, there's an interesting thing going on there with the Hebrew. I learned that there are 4 Hebrew words for rain. And in this case, basically the request is, the 4 words are simply, Yore means the former rain, which we already mentioned. Malkosh means the latter rain, which we just described. And then there's a word that's just matar, which means just rain. It's just a word for rain. But then you have Geshem. And Geshem means heavy rain or showers, like a very strong outpouring of rain. So the first where it says ask Yahweh for rain, it says ask him for matar. And then it says he will give you showers, Geshem. It will give you an outpouring of rain more than you'd even ask for. That is the sense. So he's saying in this time, we just got through reading about the grain and the new wine, which obviously you need rain to do that. This first verse of Zechariah 10 is just a continuation of that promise saying, ask for rain. And it may not even be referencing just that one year, that first year after Jesus returns. It could be a refrain that we do every year in the millennial kingdom. And he's saying, when the latter rains are there, when it's time of the latter rain, the time when crops need to be planted and begin to grow, ask me for rain during the millennial kingdom, and you're going to get showers. This is just kind of a confirmation of the abundance that God is going to pour out. Now, in verse 2, we have a change here, a very sudden shift in the tone. For it says, for the idols speak delusion, the diviners envision lies, and tell false dreams. And now all of a sudden I'm asking myself, I thought I was in a passage about the millennial kingdom. Are we going to have diviners and tellers of false dreams and false prophets in the millennial kingdom? Obviously, the answer is no, we're not. So that means we have suddenly changed time periods. The passage has jumped. It's changed to another time period. You say, well, how can you be so sure? I mean, how can we say prophecy does that? Well, if you go to Isaiah 61, let me show you an example of this. You cannot, you don't hold God to, you can't put God in a box. And he likes to communicate in ways that are a little bit tricky sometimes. Never deceptive, always truthful. But sometimes you really have to think and trust and pursue him to understand. For example, Isaiah 61, Jesus quoted this passage when he was reading the scroll of Isaiah in the synagogue in Nazareth. And this, I'm going to read straight from Isaiah 61. This is what Jesus said. He quoted it. The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to preach good tidings to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prison to those who are bound, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. Boom, and he stopped. He stopped, not only, and it wasn't, he didn't even stop at the end of a verse. He stopped in the middle of what's a verse for us, a verse 2. And he said, this has been fulfilled in your eyes today. Before you today, you've seen this fulfilled. He's saying, I am fulfilling this passage today. But he stopped in the middle of verse 2. The very next sentence says, and the day of vengeance of our God. So he did not quote that line. And that's like the second half of that sentence. He just stopped because he wasn't fulfilling that part. So there is at least a 2,500 year gap between the fulfillment of the first half or first third of Isaiah 61:2 and the second part of Isaiah 61:2. That's a big gap. So sometimes prophecy does that. And you have to really pay attention. You have to know the themes to know what part you're in. Okay, and so when we look at Zechariah 10, I've been in a passage talking about the millennial kingdom, but now he is returning to the present. Like that's the future. But when it says, for the idols speak delusion, he's in the present tense again. And that's another way you have an anchoring language to help you. Anchoring, not angering. So look at the verb tense of chapter 10. He says, the Lord will make flashing clouds. He will give them showers of rain. That's future. Then in verse 2, for the idols speak, the diviners envision. Okay, this is present tense. So, and it was true in Zechariah's day, but it's also true in our day, and especially leading up to Armageddon, before the millennial kingdom. For the idols speak delusion, the diviners envision lies, and tell false dreams. Do we have anybody doing that today? Yeah, Julie Green and Dutch Sheets come to mind. Sometime maybe I'll tell you a story about a lady in my church who was a huge fan of Dutch Sheets, and then God showed her in a supernatural experience that she was fellowshipping with a wolf. Like he literally let her feel wolf paws on her palms. So, but we have this going on, especially in the charismatic church today. I hate saying that way because I don't want to be, I'm not against the charismatic church or everybody in the charismatic church. There's a lot of error going on in the charismatic church, and that is what I'm against. And we do have people telling false dreams and diviners envisioning lies. And how do you know they are? Because they comfort in vain. God's prophets don't usually preach peace and prosperity. We have great days ahead of us. There's no time in the Old Testament or the New Testament you see a prophet of God saying the best days are ahead of us. No, it's usually only the only time that you hear a prophet talking about good times or prosperity are in two ways. One, in passages about the millennial kingdom under Jesus' direct rule, like we just saw, or as a promise that if we keep God's law, if we keep his commandments, we will prosper, we'll experience prosperity. Those are the two cases. Otherwise, generally, the prophets are calling us to repent, and they're rebuking and exhorting, not promising, oh, our best days are ahead of us. We haven't even begun to experience the blessings of God. That's not the typical tone you find. And if you disagree with that, you just need to read the Old Testament a little bit more, and the New, for that matter. So, therefore, what's the therefore? Because people are telling false dreams. People are false prophesying. That's the diviners envisioning lies. They're tickling the ears. They're comforting in vain. This is true of our society today. And because that's happening, therefore, the people wend their way like sheep, meaning they set out, went to wend, it sounds like wind, and there's a sense of that, but it really means that the sheep are setting out on a journey, but like a sheep with no shepherd, they are going to wander and wind. So therefore, the people wend their way like sheep. They're in trouble because there is no shepherd. And the American church today has a lot of people calling themselves pastors, shepherds, that aren't serving as pastors. You say, well, but they're comforting people. Yes, a lot of pastors comfort people. They make them feel better. They're going through hard times. They extend mercy. They show mercy to the counsel, etc. Hey, let me put my arm around you and help walk you through this kind of way emotionally. But shepherds, the main job of a real shepherd guarding real sheep isn't to put his arm around the sheep and cuddle it. It's twofold. He's supposed to protect and provide. He's supposed to protect the sheep from wolves, and he's supposed to provide sustenance for the sheep, lead them to food. So a true pastor of God, a true shepherd of God, will do those two things primarily. He will be looking for dangers and warn the sheep about danger, telling them what to watch out for, what not to follow, and provide food. He will preach the word, a nutritious, sufficient quantity of the word that they gain spiritual nourishment and grow, not just tiny little verses here and there and self-help messages. Verse 3, my anger is kindled against the shepherds, for all the reasons I just said, and I will punish the goat herds. So obviously the difference is sheep and goats. So there are goats in the churches, and they've got pastors too, people calling themselves pastors. And even though they're goats, those goat pastors are still being held accountable because they're supposed to be doing a job. For the Lord of hosts will visit his flock, the house of Judah. He has identified his flock as the Jewish people here, that is part of his flock, and will make them as his royal horse in the battle. Now, this is like the second, we saw references to this in chapter 9 as well. And this is making it clear that the people of Judah, Jewish people, who would be followers of Messiah at this point, and we do believe there is a final revival among the Jewish people coming where they will understand and know Jesus as Messiah and follow him, they will be part of the battle. They will be part of the fighting, is what this seems to be saying. From him comes the cornerstone. And I don't perceive that to be just spiritual warfare, okay? I know there's a temptation to spiritualize these passages so they have no meaning in the real world, but I don't think we should be taking them this way, because when you spiritualize a passage, it's good to do that if you're trying to pull out a secondary meaning to it, because there are secondary and tertiary, and fourth and fifth levels of meaning in these passages and more. Obviously, he's probably got a million that we'll be discovering for eternity. But when you look deeper and see that spiritual meaning, the symbolic meaning, it does not mean it doesn't also have a literal meaning, the most plain meaning. The most plain meaning still is true. So I believe this is referring to the real battle of Armageddon, and that is the day that he's talking about, when he will visit his flock, the second coming of Jesus. From him comes the cornerstone, from him the tent peg, from him the battle bow, from him every ruler together. They shall be like mighty men who tread down, and the word the enemies is not in the original text, who tread down in the mire, but it's kind of implied. In the mire of the streets in the battle. They shall fight because the Lord is with them, and the riders on horses shall be put to shame. So again, this is language indicating this is about a real fight, that the people of Judah, the Jewish people, Messianic Jewish people, will be engaged helping Jesus in this battle of Armageddon, okay, to establish his kingdom. From him comes the cornerstone. The cornerstone is the foundation. He's providing the foundation. The tent peg is referencing a house or a temporary shelter, usually when you're in exile. In this case is what's being alluded to. So think provision, and battle bow is about protection. And then from him every ruler, so the government. So look at foundation, government on top, bottom top, tent peg, our home within, battle bow, protecting from without. You got foundation, provision, protection, all of it is from him. He is the cornerstone of the house that's being built, of the kingdom that's being built. The tent peg is also a weapon reference. Well, so is the cornerstone for that matter, because he said that people would either be broken upon the cornerstone or the cornerstone would fall and crush them. The tent peg, I think, is referencing the female in the book of Judges that pounded a tent peg into the side of the temple of the pagan general at the end of a battle and killed him and ended the war. So I think that is probably also being referenced here. The battle bow he just mentioned, he referenced that in chapter 9 as well, saying Judah was his bow, his battle bow, and this is a secondary reference to this. The rulers, well, in the millennial kingdom, we know from the book of Revelation, the rulers are the tribulation saints, those who are martyred. If you're martyred during the tribulation, for maintaining that the Bible is God's word and Jesus is God's son, and you hold to the gospel and the truth of the Bible, that's what would get you executed. And if you are executed for that, then the book of Revelation says you're resurrected early and you rule with Jesus. You're part of the government in the millennial kingdom for the 1,000 years. Well, this is referencing that. And they should be like mighty men who tread down their enemies. And they're going to have their glorified bodies. They'll be eternal at that point. You can't defeat them. And that also may be true, like the Messianic Jews who are being called, participate in the battle as part of the house of Judah. They also may be glorified Messianic Jewish people who died during the tribulation and have been resurrected to come be part of the government. It's very likely that's who's being described rather than average. It's not ordinary, unglorified Messianic Jews, most likely. For those who don't know the book of the Revelation, what I just said sounded like a bunch of gibberish and seemed all over the place. If you're familiar with the book of Revelation, hopefully not, go read the last 3 chapters and you'll have a better understanding of what I'm talking about. They shall fight because the Lord is with them, and the riders on horses shall be put to shame. It's a beautiful thing to know that the Lord is with you. And I don't know if God has ever told you that, if he's ever said that to you. I've had a while now, he will just tell me randomly, he just kind of speaks and says, I am with you. And every time he says that, it is humbling. And my response always is, well, I hope that I am with you. I hope that in my spirit, I'm aligned with you back. I never want to presume that you're just with me and I never want to take advantage of him. I want to be in alignment with him, and I want him to feel like I'm with him. You know, that I'm not getting ahead of him, I'm not dragging behind him. But it's a wonderful feeling to feel like God is with you. And when he is with you, you can't be defeated. You know, the Lord was with David, and he defeated Goliath, a huge giant of a man. Was 10 feet tall, armor that weighs over 100 pounds. I mean, it was a massive guy. David defeated him with a single stone. When God is with you, you're undefeatable. Anything is possible. In verse 6, I will strengthen the house of Judah, and I will save the house of Joseph. So notice the difference in the verb. Okay, I will save the house of Joseph is a verb speaking of deliverance. I will deliver Joseph. And Joseph is Ephraim and Manasseh, the two sons of Joseph. And we've talked a little bit about the Scythian peoples. But for those who haven't spent a lot of time on my channel, you're going to probably be like just wondering where I'm getting all this information. But if you have, then you'll know I've talked about some of these things before. But Judah is referring to the modern nation of Israel, as well as the Jewish people who are living still in the United States and any other nations. Most Jews today, there's like 7 million in Israel and 7 million in the United States, and just a handfuls elsewhere. So really, they're mainly in those two countries now. But Joseph, Ephraim, and Manasseh would refer to technically the Celtic peoples, Manasseh, the Anglo-Saxon peoples, Ephraim, and then together, America could be considered Joseph, okay, which is not the same as Judah. We know from the dreams and visions, which I've examined thousands of them, and I've been talking about them on my channel endlessly. We know from those dreams and visions that the future of the United States of America is not real good. And we've got some judgments coming due to our behavior. I can sit here and smile about it, but when it happens, it's not going to be funny. And the end result of what millions of people have been shown by God, and I'm not exaggerating, it's really millions. They've all seen that we are not allowed to remain in this land. Just as Israel was exiled from the land of Israel before, they were either killed or taken away captive. And that was really it for the very tiny remnant remained. But that same fate has been seen about us Americans, that we will not be left in this land, that some Americans will be killed in these coming judgments, and the rest will be taken captive and sent off into exile. All right. So in this verse, when it says, I will strengthen the house of Judah, Israel, in the near future, as these events unfold, Israel, the modern nation of Israel, is going to be under assault by the Antichrist and his armies, and that's even why the Battle of Armageddon is taking place, because it's like a final attack. The nations are gathered together to destroy Judah, to destroy the Jewish people, and they will feel weak and be faltering. But when Jesus returns, that's the moment he returns to rescue them. He will strengthen them. And then he will deliver the house of Joseph, all the descendants of the Scythians, especially those, I think, that have been exiled from America, and bring them back into their ancient homeland. And he says, I will bring them back because I have mercy on them. They shall be as though I had not cast them aside. For I am the Lord their God, and I will hear them. Those of Ephraim shall be like a mighty man. And again, Ephraim is a a name, like a nickname for all the lost tribes of Israel, for those 10 tribes that were exiled and have never returned. So it can be referring to just a specific people group, a specific tribe of Israel, or it can refer to all of the northern kingdom of Israel, the 10 tribes that have been lost. And therefore, it can also euphemistically refer to America specifically. But generally think the West. It says, those of Ephraim shall be like a mighty man, and their heart shall rejoice as if with wine. Yes, their children shall see it and be glad. Their heart shall rejoice in the Lord. I will whistle for them and gather them, for I will redeem them, and they shall increase as they once increased. So, he is saying that he is going to, well, let me say this. I guess I need to allow you the opportunity to disagree with me on who Westerners are, whether or not they're descended from the Scythian tribes, and not miss the gist of the passage, okay? Not miss what God is promising. So, just go with me for a minute, and let's assume that Ephraim here is talking about America as a primary example, although it would be referencing all of the descendants of Israel in the West that have been in exile. Just go with me for a minute. What this is saying is that when Russia and China and the nations of the world come in agreement with the Antichrist and attack and invade America and the other Western countries like England and Canada, Australia, New Zealand, they remove us and kill a bunch and remove and put the rest in captivity as slaves, is saying that they will be rescued by Jesus and brought back to the ancient land of Israel to live in the millennial kingdom. The survivors will. Now, if you don't agree that America is the descendants of Ephraim or the West or anything, it doesn't matter. It's the same thing. Ephraim is somewhere in the world. It's not where, the one place Ephraim is not is in Israel right now, is in the land of Israel right now. That is Judah. Okay, that is Judah only. It's not Joseph. Joseph is still in exile. So if you don't agree that it's the peoples that I'm saying, that's fine. You don't have to agree with that. Go look yourself. Go see if you find another people group that would seem to be the descendants of Joseph, because they're out there somewhere. They're out there somewhere. We just need to define it. If it's not who I said, then it's another people group. And whoever they are, they're going to be brought back into the land of Israel during the millennial kingdom. And I noticed something here. It says, I will whistle for them and gather them, for I will redeem them, and they shall increase as they once increased. So to increase, well, let's keep reading. I will sow them among the peoples, and they shall remember me in far countries. They shall live together with their children, and they shall return. So I have lots of questions here, because from the book of Revelation, I know that there's a rapture. I know that people are caught up in the air and they meet Christ. I know that in the millennial kingdom, there are survivors after the battle of Armageddon from the nations that come into the millennial kingdom. We also know that those people who are martyred and killed during the tribulation are resurrected early and are part of the government. We know that there are people who have children during the millennial kingdom. They grow old and have children. We saw that in chapter 9. So who are the people growing old and have children? Is it just the survivors of the nations? Is it people with glorified bodies that are resurrected early? I don't think so. I don't think that one is probable. That would seem to go in the face of what Jesus said about, in the kingdom of heaven, people are not given in marriage and etc. Although that could have been applying to just heaven, the new heaven and new earth, and maybe not the millennial kingdom. I don't know. Probably not. But then you have the idea, what happens to the people who are raptured? We've always had this understanding that they're going to get their glorified bodies when they meet Christ in the clouds. We have a verse that seems to imply that, but others say it doesn't. And then there's a whole concept of, well, it's appointed a man once to die, and then the judgment. So all these people who are raptured don't they have to come back and finish their life and die naturally and then get glorified? There's lots of questions around this, especially what happens with the people who are raptured. And if the people who are raptured don't come out and live out their natural lives, then that would mean that the citizens of the millennial kingdom are all non-believers starting off. So there's lots of questions here. He's given us a lot of intriguing information, but still lots of questions. So if you heard something there that you think, all right, Zach went crazy today. Yeah, it's a little bit, it's kind of crazy. It's thinking about these things. I wonder about the millennial kingdom. I study these passages and I'm working to harmonize all of them, which is quite difficult when I haven't experienced it or seen it, as none of us have. And we don't really thoroughly understand what it's going to be like. All I know is he's in control and it's going to be cool. And I'm going to be excited to be there one way or the other. But I like these passages because of how it makes me think and how it makes me understand that life in the millennial kingdom will be real. It'll be real life, not imaginary life, not just some kind of 2D painting version of life. It's going to be very vivid and three-dimensional, fourth-dimensional, fifth-dimensional even. Anyways, you kind of get the point. I'm probably rambling at this point. All right, verse 10. I will also bring them back from the land of Egypt and gather them from Assyria. I will bring them into the land of Gilead and Lebanon until no more room is found for them. So specifically, what is being referred to by bringing them back from the land of Egypt and gathering them from Assyria? Well, he could be just referring to a different part of the remnant of Joseph or the remnant of the northern tribes that are still in those areas of the world, in Egypt and Turkey, Syria, Iraq, that are just no longer aware of who they are. You know, like the Kurds, for example, are definitely one of those peoples that could be referred to. Some people think the Coptics of Egypt may also be. Could be referring to that. Could be that the captives, when we're invaded by Russia and China and exiled, perhaps the captives are sold as slaves to Egypt and Assyria in those areas as part of the Islamic Caliphate, because those were part of the beast, the Islamic Caliphate in that time. That's possible as well. I don't know. What time will tell. When it happens, we're going to look at it, study it, and say, oh yes, that was fulfilled. Bringing them into the land of Gilead and Lebanon. That's kind of east and west. Both are north of Jerusalem and the typical Judean mountainside and country. Lebanon is up where, Beirut and, you know where Lebanon is. It's over down the Mediterranean coast. It's a big country. So they're going to be put there, which sounds like they'll be replacing some people who are no longer there. Gilead is the ancient homeland of Manasseh, on the other side of the Jordan River, kind of in Jordan/Syria area. So basically, and the line until no more room is found for them is indicating that that's why they're being put up in these northern areas, because the southern central Judean areas are already full with Judah. So they're going to be brought back into some of their ancient homelands until no more room is found for them. He shall, and sowing them among the peoples. I didn't mention that. I think that's a reference to the descendants of Joseph and Judah being gathered back, charged with a mission as part of the government of Christ in the millennial kingdom, and then sent out among the nations of the earth to teach his word and his law. That's kind of what I'm, and that's why it says, and they shall remember me in far countries, after they've been gathered back. So it's almost like come back, train, put out again. Again, a lot of this is speculation, and if you don't like speculation, then this is probably the wrong passage to study. But because it's not, there's a lot of things in it that have not happened yet, and we're doing our best to guess at what they could mean. Verse 11, he shall pass through the sea with affliction. That is a really poorly translated verse. If you have that version, it should not be translated, he shall pass through the sea with affliction. It should read, he or then. He in this case is referring not to Jesus, but to Joseph, okay? He, Joseph, the descendants of Joseph, shall cross over the sea with distress. He shall cross over the sea with distress. That makes sense according to what I just said. And strike the waves of the sea. Well, I think the waves of the sea in the Bible are always a reference to the nations. They're always symbolizing the nations. I don't think it means that the children of Joseph are going to be punching ocean waves, okay? I think it means that they're going to be fighting against the nations as they come against the Messiah in these final battles. And the reason, again, so kind of like a time, we're jumping back in time a little bit again. We've been talking more about the future millennium than back to the build up to Armageddon, to the gathering of Joseph, etc. Because it says, all the depths of the river shall dry up, and that river is the Nile, which is in Egypt. Then the pride of Assyria shall be brought down, and the scepter of Egypt shall depart. If you go read Isaiah 19, you see that there is a very detailed interaction as there is a drying up of the Nile referenced in that chapter. And it's part of the struggle between what appears to be the Antichrist and the Messiah as he comes in to conquer his forces there. Go read Isaiah 19 if you're not familiar with it. Try to read it slowly and understand it, and you'll see kind of what I mean. But in this case, I believe that it's simply a reference to Isaiah 19, saying at the time of Armageddon, at the time the Messiah is establishing his kingdom, the Nile River will dry up, which is in Isaiah 19, and the pride of Assyria, which will be the Antichrist and his caliphate, shall be brought down, and the scepter of Egypt shall depart. And he was already, and the Antichrist will most likely be ruling Egypt, and that's what Isaiah 19 also tells us. And so that is what that is saying. So I will strengthen them in the Lord, and they shall walk up and down in his name, says the Lord. So that then is jumping back to the millennial kingdom. After all this war, after all this is done, after you cross over the sea in distress, and after we bring down the pride of Assyria and remove the scepter from Egypt, then I will strengthen them in the Lord, and they will walk up and down in peace, is what's implied. They will walk up and down in peace in the land of Israel, in his name, as Christians, as followers of the Messiah, as followers of Yeshua, says the Lord. That is chapter 10. So a chapter that seems fairly straightforward when you read it quickly, as just being poetic language about God saying, hey, pray to me for rain, I'll give it. Oh, you're going to have peace someday. Oh, yeah, I'm going to knock this guy's down someday. But when you slow down and you try to say, hey, wait a second, what exactly is this referring to? When in time is this referring to? What are these exact promises? Then it gets a little bit more complicated. That requires study and knowledge and using Scripture to interpret Scripture. I hope I helped illuminate you some. You don't have to take my answers for things as gospel. You're free to research and study on your own. And I would encourage you to do that. Don't stop studying. Don't stop learning. Don't stop asking God to help you understand these passages that might be a little bit more vague or unclear or about a future time we haven't experienced, with questions that are hard to answer since we have not experienced that world. That said, I hope you have a great day, and I'm going to try to get the next Great American Eclipse video out shortly, so stay tuned for that. And hopefully I'll be back tomorrow with Zechariah 11. See you soon.